Gina Domanig, welcome to the Executive Talk. You were born in the United States, and I read somewhere that the first job you ever wanted to do was to become US President. Were you that ambitious with 8 already?
Yeah, I think I wanted to make a difference. And so I thought that that's the perfect position to have to really have an impact.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had that for a little while. Then afterwards I probably wanted to be a veterinarian or something like that.
I read somewhere that you wanted to be the federal judge as well, so it's always like high positions, right?
It's positions of authority, right?
Okay.
No, it's also a judge, because I was actually, that phase lasted a long time because I really wanted to see that things would be fair. And I thought that's the perfect position to be in, to ensure that things are fair. So fairness was a really big theme for me.
Mm-hmm. Another big theme was the finance industry. Now we can debate or argue whether that's got to do with fairness a lot. But banking, finance industry was one of your key interests when you were a student, when you became a professional in the early days. Why was that? What did tempt you so much in that field?
Actually, I had a fantastic professor in undergrad who came from the Federal Reserve. And she taught us a lot about how the International Monetary Fund works, how the World Bank works. And so it had to do more with financing development and developing countries, and a lot less than what I actually ended up doing by going to work in commercial banking at Swiss Bank in Chicago. Yeah. But that was the original interest.
Does that help you now with your job that you have? I guess you're more into cleantech industries now. You're more into the tech world, but having that sound understanding of how the markets work, how currencies work, how the whole industry works. How much does that help you in getting business in a way?
It does. I think it's important to understand what are the macro drivers of certain sectors. Right? So we work in a lot, energy, water, industrial, IT. So that's important. I would say it's less of a currency problem. I think what is really important though is having a very, very deep finance understanding, even accounting, because a lot of the startups don't have that. So that's where we have to jump in.
That's a good point, because that would have been my next question. Do you feel that there's a lack of that knowledge in the industry or in the companies you deal with, the startups, the people with great ideas, but if you go and dig a little bit deeper, that you have to say sometimes, look guys, maybe you have to get your accounts right or your numbers right first.
Right. I think we're investing in industrial technology, so it's natural that a lot of the entrepreneurs have an engineering or scientific technical background. They always underestimate the value of marketing experience, or sales and marketing. Business model, do you have the right business model? Do you know how to approach the customers? What's the sales cycle? What's technology adoption cycles? So that's usually one area that we first notice as a problem. And then the second one is finance. And it's amazing, and that's not just in Europe, it's also in our North American companies. They almost always are underestimating the value of having a really good finance person on their team.
Why is that? Or did that change? Or do you think like 20, 30 years ago it was the same thing? That those people are just not that interested maybe in the financial part?
I think they underestimate the value, or they overestimate their own abilities to cover the finance areas sufficiently, right? So they think it's something you can just kind of do on the side. But then if they get in trouble, account-wise or with their auditor, then it could have serious consequences, right? So I think before we invest in a company, we want to make sure that they are properly accounting for things, that they have their finance processes under control. It's a little bit harder, I think, when these are very young companies, they have the intention to do so, but when is the right time? Mm-hmm. So it's harder for them to judge, is it time already now to invest in having a finance professional on their team?
When you deal with those people, I mean, it's probably the biggest cliche ever, but are these more like tech-savvy people, as you imagine them in Silicon Valley, the bearded hipsters with great ideas, but as we said, that you have to work on the background, on the basis as well.
Some of the young entrepreneurs are kind of, you feel like they're just coming out of school and stuff. But in industrial technology, we typically invest in more mature entrepreneurs. So people who have quite a number of years of experience. And I think that that's also a little bit an issue. I think in Switzerland, people often confuse a young company with a young entrepreneur. We invest in young companies, not necessarily in young entrepreneurs, because I always say nobody's going to buy a solid oxide fuel cell from a 25-year-old. That's quite dangerous, right? So it's really important that people have a deep understanding of how the industry works. And the proof to me, or kind of the acid test, was maybe it's a young entrepreneur starting up a company, but was he able to attract a really experienced executive out of industry to join his founder team? And if he's able to do that, I think, first of all, it shows very good judgment, but also it's a certain kind of credibility for his business.
So having said that, if a bunch of young friends straight from university come to you, you feel a little bit less ready to invest than if they have a kind of a diverse board, for example, as well.
Well, the board, it's nice, but I want it really to be somebody in the management team.
The operation.
Right? And I think that that's a problem, is a lot of times the students coming just out of school, they really underestimate. And I always say it's not that I think that they're intentionally misleading us. They don't know themselves. They have no idea how the industry works, right? And just having, talked to a couple of people isn't enough. You need to have that experience in the management team to deal with every single aspect of the business, how they present to customers, what the business model is, what the pricing strategy should be, what are realistic expectations, do you charge for pilots, don't you charge for pilots? So all of these daily decisions that they need to make have to be done really with the understanding of how the industry works.
So how do you see your role in that as well? So is it more a teacher? Is it almost like a mother sometimes? When we talk about these young entrepreneurs, that you have to almost show them the ropes and show them how things work.
Yeah, usually we simply won't invest in a company unless they have that, right? And having just them tell me, yeah, one day we will. I've been down that road, and no, because they get quite comfortable in their chair, and then they don't want to make room for somebody. Because it's not just making room in the decision making, it's making room also in the cap table, right? They need to give this person a cut in the equity of the company. And a lot of times I think the entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, they think that, well, they're the ones who came up with the idea, the invention, so they should be the only equity holder, and that's not right. I mean, the financial or the technical innovation is just a small part of the success of a company, right? They need to be able to make room in the equity of the company for other professionals as well.
You often talk about that in interviews. Is that the main challenge that you have to convince these people to let go, to just not, they can't have it both ways. They can't have capital on board, but really stay in charge of the whole thing, that you really have to say, look, let go.
Do you want a big piece of a very small pie or a smaller piece of a much, much larger pie? And I think that this, getting entrepreneurs who have this ambition, who understand that they're going to lose control of their company, but their company is going to be wildly successful. That trade-off, I think you find that much more in North America. You certainly find it in Israel. So I would say that in the UK, in the more mature venture capital markets, if you like, I think the entrepreneurs understand that that's a trade-off that works in their favor at the end.
Sitting in Switzerland and working in that beautiful office in Zurich, isn't it frustrating that the Swiss don't seem to have that approach? And I mean, you're quite honest about it, and you're quite outspoken about it, that this is something lacking in the Swiss industry or in the Swiss kind of startup environment.
It really is. I think it's unfortunate because they could have such greater ambitions, right? If they would be willing to take on more money, to grow more aggressively, to bring on better talent in their management teams. They could also, I would say for their own reputation, they could achieve a lot more. But they value control, in my view, too much, right? I'd rather be super successful and have the company and my invention be used all over the world than to be able to say, well, I still own a majority of the company.
Speaking of all over the world, you are dealing with businesses all over the world. As I said, very few Swiss. You've come to Switzerland 20 years ago?
30.
30 years ago already. You speak perfectly Swiss German as well. You're very integrated in here. Do you ever feel a kind of a responsibility to push Swiss businesses more? I think it's not even 5% of your business go through Swiss companies, right? I mean, do you feel something like a shared responsibility within the office to do that?
Sure, and I think that's actually part of being American, is that you feel that you have a duty to give back, right? And to make a contribution and to volunteer. And so I am, where it's welcome, where it's asked for, I will definitely participate, but I've kind of tired of just running around complaining about how it should be functioning differently, how it could be improved. I'm not going to. I always say you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So
and you're not just pushing Swiss business just for the pushing sake.
But what we will do is we will spend a lot more time with Swiss entrepreneurs than we would with any others. So even if it's a company that we think is too early stage, or we don't think it's going to work, if they actually want to come to our office and have a meeting with us to discuss it, we'll invest that time. We don't typically do that.
You get a lot of requests. Is it 1,000?
1,800.
1,800 business cases on your desk.
A year, yeah.
And you pick out maybe 5 or 6 or something like that. How do you choose the right one? And on the other hand, if I take the negative spin, do you often fail in those 5 or 6 that you say, oh, I should have looked at the other one?
You always have to wonder if you're going to regret taking the decision. No, first of all, we look at the value proposition and the market potential. That's always our first cut on a deal, right? We look at that. Can this really make a huge impact? Is there a huge market demand for it? After that becomes more of looking at the financials, looking at the management team. And also looking at what role can we play? Can we actually help this company, right? Because every company is going to fall off the tracks at some point in time. It's inevitable almost. The question is, do we have the ability to get them back on track? So do we have enough contacts to potential customers, potential partners, potential management team members, or additional board members? So what can we actually contribute? If we don't think we can contribute anything, we will typically not invest, because we're concerned that if they do fall off the tracks, we will just be standing there as watching it happen, right? That's not good. But going back to the question about do a lot fail, we invest in companies that are typically already over the commercialization hurdle. So they already have I like to say 3 commercial customers, so 3 paying customers. Typically when a company gets to that stage, a lot of the risk is behind them, right? So if let's say 10, 15% of the companies that we invest in don't work out, that's perfectly normal. The question is, how much money did you put in those companies, right? So it should, by percentage-wise of the overall fund, it should be a much lower percentage.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good business.
Exactly.
When you look at those companies and those 1,800 propositions and business cases on the table, we talked a little bit about it. Some are a bit more risky, some a little bit less, I guess. You being an American in Switzerland, and we tend to think that the Americans are a bit more risk takers and not as risk averse as the Swiss. Does that help you in your decision making, that you come from a different culture or from a different background, that it's perfectly fine to fail once in a while, maybe?
Right. Yeah, it definitely helps me. Because you can't have sleepless nights every time a company is in trouble, because then you would never sleep, right? So I think giving yourself the freedom also to make mistakes, to not beat yourself up because you made a bad call. If you made the best decision with the information that you had at that time, then it's good enough. Can you learn something from every mistake? Definitely, and we do. We spend a lot of time reviewing not only the failures but also successes to see what can we learn, what can we do better. So this idea of continual improvement and not just trying to find somebody to blame for making a mistake, because that's part of our business.
Maybe that's the American approach. Where does the Swiss come in, and where's your company more Swiss than American venture capital companies? Would you say that that can only work here, or that can only?
Yeah, there definitely are things. I mean, we definitely benefit by having, I think, half the people in the team are Swiss. And we have a lot of people that are, PhDs from the ETH and stuff. So a lot of people with a technical background. I think being so thorough and being very analytical. So compared to the typical American VC that we co-invest with, so they're our colleagues, right? In the exact same space, we will do a lot more analysis. Because what we don't want to do is to make a mistake that we could have seen. Right. If there we will beat ourselves up a little bit if it's something blows up in our face that we said, you know what, if we had done the analysis properly at the time, then we could have avoided this or mitigated the risk somehow. So that is a benefit of having the Swiss. So having these processes and this analytical culture, I think, is a nice combination with the more Anglo-Saxon, come on, let's do it, and sure, there's always going to be risks with every deal, but that's part of our life, right? That's our business.
Speaking of those cultural differences, when you came to Switzerland, I mean, you've been working for a Swiss company, so to speak, already in the US for the bank. Then you came to Switzerland. Then you worked a long time for Sulzer, right. Which marked you a lot. You say in interviews. Also the company culture. Did that take some time for you as an American coming to Switzerland, getting to know maybe the Swiss peculiar way of doing business or the Swiss tradition or the culture?
Yeah, it's hard when you first come to a country, it's hard to distinguish, is it just the company culture, is it the national culture, is it just the individual that I'm dealing with? But Sulzer was, I would say, in retrospect, a very, very good school for me to go through. I was very young. When I joined Sulzer, I was 25. Put into a position of a lot of exposure, a lot of responsibility. I was in M&A, and I very quickly then came to run the M&A department at Sulzer. And in the 90s, Sulzer did a lot of transactions. So I carried a lot of responsibility with me. But I was, woman, non-Swiss, didn't do the military, not an engineer, so I was very, very different.
A minority.
I was like the colorful bird, if you like. That also gave me, though, I would say, freedom, right? Because they couldn't force me into a peg. They weren't really even sure what I was. But I did have to learn to deal with. Sulzer had a lot of very, very positive aspects about it. Very high work ethic, incredible integrity, honesty. Transparency. I think there were a lot of really important things that I learned and that influenced me, but it was also kind of a rough communication culture. I got, if you like, thick skin that I definitely can thank Sulzer for, right?
I think you talked about it once, that the CEO at that time even called you out on certain, when you had a board meeting or something, that he would say, so no, that's not true what you say. Why wouldn't you tell me more about it or so? Being a boss in Switzerland, is that completely different than knowing the executives in both cultures? Is that the typical Swiss way? That it is a bit harsher, maybe something?
Well, maybe that was Sulzer too. Okay. I haven't worked in a lot of. I mean, working at Swiss Bank back in the end of the 80s and stuff, very hierarchical, right? Much more so, almost kind of Germanic, and not, I would think today, not so Swiss. But I think that there are definitely differences in leadership between the U.S. and Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. What's the biggest one?
I would say directness, although at Sulzer it was quite direct, it was a little bit too direct. I think in the US people package negative messages much more nicely, but they give them to you. They say often you have to count to 3. So if an American's giving you feedback, the first thing they say will be positive, the second thing they say will be positive. It's the third thing you have to watch out for, because that's the real message. And that's typically something that's more critical, right? So I think that you have to learn how to adapt to that communication style. But people in the US, and it's also a meritocracy much more. In the US, if you don't deliver, you will get fired, right? I think a lot of Swiss would be very shocked, right, at how quickly they would be fired. Because in the US, maybe it's too short-term focused, but that's simply the way it works, right?
That's something that's very typical of you, that you are a straight talker, and you say as well, look, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you know, there's no time losing time, and you're very straightforward as well when it comes to women in business. You say that as well, that you know, you have to fight for your place. Nothing is given to you for free, not because you are a woman. That how has that changed? I know you've been talking about that topic for years, and I'm pretty sure you must be sick by now. But I have to ask you anyway: do you think the state has improved? I mean, being a businesswoman on that level, has it become better?
I think there are. I mean, maybe I'm just very lucky, right? Because I didn't suffer under. Or I don't feel that I suffered under any kind of massive discrimination. I also don't like the victim role, right? So I probably avoided seeing it in that way. But I think there are more women in executive positions. So there are a lot more examples to look to. So for younger women, they at least see that it is possible, right? I'm not the only woman. When I was at Sulzer at the time, I was the only woman in senior management for a long time, right? And the first and the only and the youngest. So that has definitely changed, right? I think it would still be nice to see more women coming up through the technical areas. It's still, in our team here, very, very few of our technical people or people with technical backgrounds are actually women. Hopefully that will change, right? But on the other side, I have to also have respect for women who don't want to go down that path. If there are a lot of compromises or sacrifices that one has to make to get this far in your career. And if somebody, whether it's a man or a woman, if they don't want to do that, that's their own choice, right? But you can't have your cake and eat it too.
And what can you do to provide that or to promote that diversity? You're in boards as well, so right. you sit in places where you could do something. Do you actively promote it? Because I know you're a big fan of diversity in all levels of companies.
Sure, I do. I mean, they know that I'm going to bring it up, right? If I'm at a board meeting and I say, when's the last time we checked about equal pay for equal work? They kind of all smile and they go, oh, we were just waiting for you to come with that, right? But they're doing it, right? And I think that it's important to make sure that the men also feel comfortable working with women, that you don't, you're not such a disturbance, if you like, that they think, oh, never again, I don't want to work with women, it's too much of a hassle or whatever. So there is, I think, a responsibility on the part of women to adapt as well. I mean, if you go to, I always say, if you go to Rome, you're not going to be speaking German, right? So if I'm going to go choose to work in an all-male environment, I have to also adapt a bit. Right?
Mm-hmm. Some might say we have to change that environment as quickly as possible, and maybe we have to force men to do it. Are you for women quotas?
I'd rather not. I'd rather we didn't have to do quotas, right? Whether it becomes necessary in the end, perhaps, I don't know, some kind of a mild form of it. But I wish that we didn't need it, because I don't want women to have that kind of stamp on their head that you're just here because of the quota, right? I'd rather do other things to incentivize, or maybe it's more like a name and shame, right? Maybe there's the stick part of it and not just the carrot. But I do think it's important that something happens, right? I think, though, in Switzerland, the pool, if you think that a person in a board should have management experience, executive management experience, then you need to have more people in that universe to pick from, right? Right now, to say that, 50% of the board should be female, I mean, sorry, but I don't think that 50% of the universe of qualified people are female.
So it's already difficult to find the ones.
Exactly. So I think you need to start much earlier in people's career and then really see which of the women actually want to achieve that, are willing to make the sacrifices to achieve that. And then that becomes, to me, the eligible pool, right? It's not just the general population, right? Just because 50% of the population is female.
A final question, going from the woman back to the girl, to the 8-year-old girl who wanted to become U.S. president when she was little. When you look back at your life so far, and when you look back at that girl who was 8 years back then and wanted to be, you know, the biggest in the world, would that 8-year-old girl be proud of what you've become? Would she be surprised of what you've become? I think you didn't imagine yourself living in Switzerland, having an office in Zurich, right? How did she think about you now?
I mean, there's certainly, I didn't plan to be where I am today. I didn't plan to have my own company. I didn't plan really to be in venture capital. I didn't even know what venture capital was until I was well out of graduate school. But I think proud in the sense that, yes, we're making an impact. And I think, you know, if I was just doing asset management, I would probably not feel as proud as in the role of being venture capital in clean technologies.
With the sustainability.
Exactly. We're making a contribution. And I think everybody here in the team can say they identify with the impact that we're having. And that's where it's no longer work. It becomes more of a calling, if you like. It becomes something that you really identify with.
So a very happy woman.
Yeah. Very happy.
Gina Domanig, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.